Part 54. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 531. Hua hua hua. A tiny trickle of water came from deep underground. Although the sound was very small, it was the only sound in this claustrophobic stone room other than the tapping of iron tools. It could be heard clearly. Zonglejiju frowned and thought for a moment, then suddenly came back to his senses, his eyes filled with joy. I understand, the tide is high. To lift such a heavy boulder, you can only use quicksand or water. This room is for hiding people and will not be used only once, so it must be lifted by the high tide. The door will open immediately. Su Buletinling breathed a long sigh of relief, stood up quickly, came to the waistline mechanism just now, and pointed the direction of Yan's head towards the stone door outside. Then he picked up the imperial seal and took Zonglejiju to the door to wait. The knocking sound from behind continued, and Zonglejiju looked back. What do? The doors are open. They dug through the stone wall and came out. There is Zulu behind. 2. Zonglejiju nodded, took Su Buling's arm and waited in front of the stone door. It's just that the mechanism should be opened by the gravity of water. Such a heavy stone wall obviously requires a lot of water. After waiting for about half an hour, you could hear a click-click sound behind the wall. The stone door shook slightly, but it still didn't open. Su Buletinling's palms were sweating, and Zonglejiju felt a little painful from squeezing. Just when he was looking forward to it, there was a soft sound of pop from behind the quilt, and a few stones fell to the ground. Su Buling's face changed slightly, he cursed secretly and looked back, only to see an iron tip protruding from the stone wall in the distance. When he stirred it hard, a gap as big as a fist popped out. Then the iron gun was retracted and an eye appeared at the entrance of the cave, and Chen Chang's excited voice said, put it on, I'll hum him." Chen Chang, who was lying in the narrow hole of the stone wall, saw Su Buling and Zonglejiju standing in the room. His excitement suddenly turned into unspeakable despair, and he almost walked over. "What's wrong? What's going on? What did you see?" As the stone wall was opened, the sounds from behind could be clearly heard. The 5 men were all restless, and their patience was obviously torn to pieces by this boring and desperate work. Chen Chang's eyes were splitting as he looked at Su Buling, who was also trapped in another cell. You can imagine how desperate he felt. Just like a prisoner trying to escape from prison, he dug a tunnel with a spoon for 20 years and finally reached the septic tank. The current situation is probably not much better than there. It's Su Buletinling. Chen Chang's face turned red, veins popped up on his forehead, and he screamed in surprise. "What? Why didn't he leave? Is there an ambush? The noise is constant." Chen Chang was almost crazy. He stared at the stone wall opposite, no matter how difficult it was to dig through, and didn't know how to react. But at this moment, the stone wall in front suddenly slowly lifted up a little, revealing a gap. Wait. The door is open, it's open, cough cough cough. Under the ups and downs, Chen Chang, who was originally uninjured, was directly stimulated to spit out a mouthful of old blood. While coughing violently, he wanted to use an iron gun to break open the stone cave. Su Buling turned around and raised his sword. "Don't move, or I will destroy the stone gate when I go out." Chen Chang suddenly paused. He naturally did not believe that Su Buling could destroy Shimin, but the way out was right in front of him. If he ran out before the door opened, he might be hacked to death by Su Buling, who had been resting. He gritted his teeth at the moment, but staring. The 5 people behind the door did not move without permission. They were probably afraid of being imprisoned. No matter what happened at this time, they would definitely go out and see the light before fighting. No one wanted to dig through the stone door again. Ka-ka-ka. The sound of the gears turning became more and more intense, and finally the ground shook violently, something fell, and the indestructible stone wall in front of them opened in an instant. Su Buling didn't hesitate, picked up Zhongli, who had become a lady, and ran out of the passage. It's open. It's open. Chen Chong did not hesitate, stirred the spear vigorously, and tried his best. In about a quarter of an hour, he broke a gap in the stone wall, got out of it, and ran towards the passage. Although the entrance to the cave was small, the five of them were not ordinary people and they jumped out of the cave in almost the blink of an eye. Ding Yuan and Chen Daizai quickly distanced themselves from Li Hanzheng, while Chen Chong in front turned around and shouted. It is said that the imperial seal is in Su Buling's hand. I saw it with my own eyes and it has already run away. The 6 people who had just escaped had no time to rejoice when they remembered the major events affecting the world. After looking at each other, Chen Daizai forced Li Hanzheng back with his sword again, and retreated into the passage with Ding Yuan. Li Hanzheng wanted to pursue the national jade seal. He exhausted his physical strength last night and had no intention of fighting with Chen Daizai and others, so he chased after him. It's just that 6 people dug rocks for a day. It's considered powerful to be able to run at this time, not to mention the speed, which is about the same as ordinary people running. At the front, although Su Buling rested for a night, he lacked water and dry food. He only ate a little bit for long-term preparation. At this time, he drank the water bag in one gulp, but he could not quickly replenish his energy, so he was not running fast. But after all, he had been resting and was much better than the hard workers behind him. In half a quarter of an hour, he saw the light at the end of the corridor. Zhongli almost cried with joy. Holding the jade seal passed down from the country, she took a few bites at Su Buling and said excitedly. It's out, we're alive. Su Buling had just tried to calm down and comfort Zhongli last night. How could he not be terrified? Now that he had seen the light again, he was so excited that he could not restrain himself. He whispered. My wife, don't move. What if I fall? Zhongli was stunned for a moment, and her thoughts gradually recovered. Her face suddenly flushed. Who is your wife? I was just joking. Pa. A very strong slap hit the elastic skirt, and waves of flesh appeared. Hiss. Zhongli frowned in pain and almost cried. She pursed her lips, but did not dare to make trouble again. Su Buling's footsteps flew, and in the blink of an eye he rushed to the place where the light was shrinking. He drew his sword and split the ice skates. The 2 of them jumped out of the snow. In an instant, the sea breeze covered their faces, and the dazzling light made it difficult to see anything. Su Buling squinted his eyes and scanned the surroundings carefully, but found that he was on a small island. The landform was very different from that of Bodhi Island, and it was also much smaller. It was probably Yuechuo Island opposite. Zhongli face froze. Oh no! There's no boat. Su Buling looked around and could vaguely see the Bodhi Island and the coastline at the end of his field of vision, but at least 6 miles away, with his current physical strength, it was a question whether he could swim through the cold sea water with Zhongli. Zhongli looked back at the cave entrance. What should I do? Should I give them the jade seal? Let's look for it first. Su Buling gasped, holding a knife and running on the snow, running to the beach to see if he could find a fishing boat. I don't know if it's a lucky person, just when he ran to the beach, he saw a fishing boat parked near the beach. Su Buling paused, feeling that something was wrong. No matter how lucky he was, it couldn't be this good. It was like someone had deliberately arranged it. The doubt didn't last too long. Just as Su Buling paused, a cry came from behind. Su Buling. The voice was cold and clear, it was a woman. Su Buling's whole body trembled slightly. He looked back and saw a tall and graceful woman in a white dress standing up on a large rock beside him. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 532. The sea breeze was strong, and except for the sea water and snow, there was nothing worth noting around the island. On top of a boulder next to the beach, Ningqingyi rested her chin on her arms and looked at the sea aimlessly. She was covered with hay collected from the island. There was not much food and water bags left at hand. The square wooden box was also buried under the snow. After waiting like this for 3 or 4 days, Ningqingyi gradually came to her senses. That bastard Su Danking wouldn't deliberately leave her on this island to torment her, would he? Could it be that he said the wrong thing again and offended someone? I heard that Su Danking deceived many girls because of his small belly. It's really possible. After all, what if? Anyway, Li Hansheng can't be found, and there's no other urgent time, so there's nothing wrong with just spending a few days on this isolated island far away from the world. Tap tap tap. Ningqingyi had this idea because the island beneath her feet was too desolate and remote. It was more than 6 miles away from the coast. There were no crops or buildings. No one might visit it for decades. I lay on the stone and watched for 3 or 4 days, but there was not even a passing ship, let alone Su Buletinling. How could Su Buling, the dignified prince of the vassal, run to this desolate place in western Liaoning? Even if he came to this desolate place, how could he run to this small island? With such random thoughts, Ningqingyi felt that she was being fooled, but she did not leave. With a pair of charming fox eyes, she hugged the man's neck shamelessly, wishing to bury the man's head in her chest. When Ningqingyi saw the pair of wild mandarin ducks, her eyes, which were originally filled with a bit of surprise, sank slightly, and the raised corners of her mouth returned to their usual cold expression. How could this crazy woman be here with Su Buling, still hugging each other? While Ningqingyi was looking at the sea in trance, the sound of running footsteps suddenly came from behind. She suddenly came back to her senses, thinking that a ship had docked from another part of the island. She looked back cautiously, only to see a familiar young man running out of a small mountain col among the rugged snow-covered islands, with a sword hanging on his waist. With his left hand holding a graceful woman like a child, looking around while running, as if she was very tired. The woman sitting on the young master's arm was all too familiar. Thinking of this, Ningqingyi quickly gave up the messy thoughts just now and stood up from the grass. No. Qingyi. Could it be that they came here to have an affair? Ningqingyi's thoughts were spinning all of a sudden. During the moment of hesitation, Su Buling passed by below and ran towards the boat on the beach. Perhaps he noticed someone was nearby and paused in his steps. Now that they were closer, Ningqingyi also saw signs of fighting on Su Buling's body. Both of them looked a little embarrassed, more like they were fleeing. Su Danking asked me to wait for you here and bring you something. If I see you coming, I will give it to you. If I see other people coming, I will call someone to come to you. I thought he was playing a trick on me. What's wrong with you? Su Buletinling was panting, with a bit of confusion in his eyes. After thinking about it for a moment, he could only guess that it was the old master from Yuelu Mountain who knew that the exit was on Yutuo Island and had a backup plan here. At the edge of the beach, Su Buling, who was holding Zhongli Jiju in his arms, turned around after hearing the sound. His eyes were filled with confusion at first, and then there was surprise as if he had seen his wife. He ran over quickly and said urgently, "Qingyi, why are you here?" Ningqingyi saw that Su Buling seemed to be avoiding pursuit, so she didn't dare to be careless. She jumped off the big rock with her things and landed in front of Su Buling. Zhongli Jiju held the imperial jade seal in her arms. When she saw what was in the box, she couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. She compared it a few times. Except for the subtle difference in the material of the jade and the one in her hand, the shape and size were exactly the same. This old immortal is so powerful. Su Buletinling was also confused for a moment. Although he couldn't figure out Grandpa Fuebao's intentions and how he arranged it, it was clear what he was going to do now. Time was running out and there was no time to think about it. Su Buling put down Zhongli Jiju, walked behind the stone together, and asked. What is it? A hot bun with chicken legs is more useful than anything else at this time. The thing in Ning Qingyi's hand was obviously not a food box, and she had not opened it privately. She opened the package and the wooden box inside with one hand. In an instant, golden light flowed, and a seal was placed squarely inside. Su Buring coughed lightly and without explaining, exchanged the two jade seals, then covered the wooden box and ran quickly to the small fishing boat next to the beach. King Yi, your father Li Hanzhong is also behind you. You lie down in the cabin and don't show your head. Remember, otherwise it will cause serious trouble. Ning Qingyi was still confused about the situation, but she had always been straightforward and knew the importance. She did not act impulsively at this moment. She ran to the fishing boat and lay down in it, holding the wooden box containing the real jade seal in her arms. Ning Qingyi held the wooden box and frowned slightly when she heard Su Buling's words. Are you scolding Miss Song's grandfather for his old age? Why? Su Buling placed the fake jade seal on the bow of the boat, stepped on the soft beach, pushed the small fishing boat into the sea water, and pushed the boat away from the coast. Stop. Keep the jade seal, otherwise I will kill you without mercy. Zhongli Jiju helped push the boat, and when he saw black spots emerging from the snow behind him, he said anxiously. What are you going to do? Why don't you go together? I'll come right away, park the boat on the sea and wait for me. It was about the Dragon Throne, involving millions of lives, death, wealth, and glory. Ding Yuan knew what to do without thinking. Even if he chased Su Buling to death, he still had to get the jade seal back. After a while, Li Hanzhong rushed out from underneath with two of his subordinates. He looked up and saw Su Buling holding the jade seal and preparing to run away. He said loudly like a bell. No. If you dare to take the jade seal, you will definitely not be able to leave Yuzhu. Among the snowy ridges of the island, Ding Yuan, Chen Daizai and Chen Chong rushed out from the passage and ran wildly. When they saw Su Buling pushing the boat to the sea and trying to escape, they let out several angry shouts. The three kings of Su, Chu, and Wu were all trying to steal the jade seal. Even if they didn't succeed, they wouldn't dare to speak openly about it. It wouldn't matter if Su Buling ran away. But if Su Buling takes Yuxi away, things will go wrong. If Su Buling goes back, he will have the opportunity to compete in the Central Plains, and the king of Chu will lose an important chess piece in the fight for unification. And when Su Buling was killed, King Su also attacked Guanzhong Dao, which could not do anything to King Chu. It had been many years since I heard that man's voice. Now his voice had not changed, but his words were completely different. Ning Qingyi's eyes turned red for a moment. She held the wooden box in her left hand and the sword in her right hand. Su Buling pushed the boat into the sea and winked quickly. Li Hanzhong had no intention of killing Su Buling from the beginning to the end, otherwise he would not have visited Su Buling's house to persuade him not to interfere. However, in front of Ding Yuan and others, Li Hanzhong obviously would not have a relationship with Su Buling. This threat was also a reminder to Su Buling not to play with fire. After taking the jade seal, he would become the target of public criticism and no one would care about him anymore. The identity of the crown prince. But when these threatening words reached the ears of Ning Qingyi, who was lying in the cabin, the feeling was completely different. Zhongli Jiju saw the boat floating into the sea and quickly jumped on to pick up the oar. Let's go together. Don't take any chances. They have been digging rocks all day and they can't catch up with us. Su Buling didn't want to take risks, so he didn't leave directly. After pushing the ship into the sea, he saw Ding Yuan and others chasing him and shouted. Don't move. It'll be over when you get up. Just trust me once. He wants to kill you. I. Ning Qingyi tensed up and wanted to say something, but when she saw the look in Su Buling's eyes, she could only grit her teeth and made no move. Chen Chong and Chen Daizai pursued them with weapons in hand. Naturally, they didn't care about the small boat with only one useless woman. They stared at Su Buling with fierce eyes and said coldly, "Hand over the jade seal, and you still have a chance to live. Don't give it to them. Run quickly and leave me alone." After saying that, he stood on the beach with the fake jade seal in his left hand and a knife in his right hand, facing the three people who were chasing him. He seemed to be afraid that the jade seal would bring trouble to Zhonglijiju. The ship quickly left the shore and drifted outward. Ding Yuan was not a fool. If he were to deal with Su Buling now, he would be surrounded by both sides, and he would lose his combat advantage. He said urgently, "Su Buling, you are the crown prince of Su. Everyone is grabbing the jade seal and no one is clean. As long as you hand over the jade seal, I dare not kill you. They are no match for us. How do you choose yourself?" After saying this, he, Chen Daozai and others turned around and faced Li Hanzheng. Li Hanzheng's clothes fluttered like an eagle attacking a rabbit, his speed increased to the extreme, and he attacked Chen Daozai and others. "Kill them for me, and you can still run." Zhen Yufeng and Qiu Fengqing were outflanking them. Because Su Buletinling couldn't escape as the ship was offshore, and everyone was on an isolated island, they naturally had to kill Chen Daozai and Chen Chong, who were more powerful. Su Buling stood in the knee-high sea water. Naturally, he didn't want to run in and fight for a fake jade seal. After waiting for Zhonglijiju to row the boat to a safe distance, he suddenly threw the fake jade seal in his hand far away from the coast. "You guys are cruel. I won't play anymore." After saying that, he jumped back into the water and swam hard towards the ship. When Li Hanzheng, Ding Yuan, and others saw Su Buling giving up the fight for the jade seal and escaping, they naturally would not run after Su Buling. They immediately distanced themselves and rushed towards the jade seal thrown in the sand. As long as one of them succeeded and jumped into the sea, the others would. If the two of them delay their opponent, the jade seal will be in their pocket. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 533. The world is like a chess game, and everyone is a chess piece. There is no hatred between chess pieces, it just depends on who controls them and where they are. On an isolated island overseas, the 6 people who had just worked together to break the stone door and shared drinks around the fire were caught in the bloodiest fight in their lives, and it was destined that only one party could walk out standing. In the cold sea water, Su Buling swam hard to the boat hovering in the waves. Ning Qingyi still hid and did not get up. Zhonglijiju lay on the bow of the boat, stretched out his right hand and pulled Su Buling up from the sea water. Splash! The sea water on his robe splashed on the boat. Su Buling sprayed white mist from his mouth. He looked back at the coast. After making sure that no one was chasing him, he breathed a sigh of relief and sat on the bow of the boat, gasping for breath. Zhonglijiju was a little anxious, rowing hard, urging, "Take off the wet clothes quickly, otherwise you will freeze to death. Miss Ning, lend me a piece of clothes." Su Buling raised his hand, "Don't get up, just lie down." Walking in the cold western Liaoning, it is natural not to wear only single clothes. Ning Qingyi took off her outer skirt, wearing only a close-fitting white shirt and white pants, and handed it to Su Buling. Seeing Su Buling take off his robe, it was wet from inside to outside, and he probably had to take it off completely. Ning Qingyi's expression changed slightly. She had never seen a naked man before, so she naturally didn't dare to look at it, and her eyes turned to one side. Zhonglijiju and Su Buling had been through thick and thin together, so there was no need to be so particular at this moment. However, he still did not focus on Su Buling, but looked at Yuechuo Island, which was getting farther and farther away. They robbed a fake imperial seal, Ah Zhenyushan, seems to be dead. Ning Qingyi grew up in Shu. Zheng Yushan was the leader of Shu in those days and had taken good care of the mountain stronghold. Hearing this, he suddenly leaned forward and glanced over the edge of the boat. After seeing the almost hell-like fight on the beach, he could not help but show some shock and anger in his eyes. Are they crazy? Su Buling did not look back. Wrapped in a white cloak, he hesitated for a moment and sighed softly. You can't go over there. As long as you show your head, they will guess that there is a fraud, and the three of us will die. What they are robbing is the throne, which is a matter of death. It is not a child's play. Zhongli Jiju knew the relationship between Ning Qingyi and Li Hanzheng, and the 6 people worked together to break the stone just now. Everyone was moved by their indomitable willpower. For the real jade seal, or for a fake jade seal, dying here, even Zhongli Jiju felt it was not worth it. Chen Chong and Chen Daizai are too powerful, only Li Hanzheng and Qiu Fengqing are left. I guess they can't stop them. Isn't it a dead end? Ning Qingyi's eyes showed a moment of entanglement, holding the hilt tightly, breathing rapidly, but did not speak. Su Buling also wanted to run and kill Chen Daizai, but he gave up the fight for the Jade Seal, and there was no reason to go back from any perspective. After a day and a night of fighting and confinement, it was difficult to sustain physical strength. Going back to help in the name of grabbing the Jade Seal would be regarded as a target of hunting, which was not advisable. Seeing Ning Qingyi staring at the beach, his whole body stiff, Su Buling sighed, hurry up and go to Bodhi Island, Zulu is probably here too. As long as Zulu comes, Li Hanzheng won't die. Ning Qingyi's eyes obviously relaxed a little when he heard this. Seeing that he was already far away, he quickly lay on the edge of the boat and rowed the boat hard. I have to take Li Hanzheng to my mother's grave to apologize, and then kill him with my own hands. He can't die here because of such a small matter. Su Buling sighed softly, and didn't comfort him, not knowing how to comfort him. Before Li Hanzheng left, he was obviously very good to his wife and daughter. Qingyi should have loved his father very much since he could remember until he was 5 or 6 years old. Later, Li Hanzheng left and never came back. It is true that he hated him in his heart, but the appearance in his memory was the harmonious and beautiful picture of the family before Li Hanzheng left. When he really saw Li Hanzheng in a desperate situation, how could his heart not be disturbed at all? Zhongli Jiju sat in front of Su Buling and rowed the boat. Perhaps the scene behind him was too tragic. Just like raising a gu, she could not intervene, so she could only change the subject. Why did Su Danking let Miss Ning wait here? And what about the fake jade seal? Su Buling was now stable and had time to think. He frowned and reviewed the situation carefully. When Li Hanzheng found the clues to Bodhi Island, the people from Yuelu Mountain were also in the Wu Wang mansion. Logically, only I, the Wu Wang, and the old master knew the news. The people from the Chu Wang rushed to Yuzhu so quickly, it must be that the old master secretly sent the message and deliberately lured them. Zhongli Jiju was a little confused. Since he left a backup for you, why did he bring the people from the Chu Wang here? Why not just let you and Li Hanzheng fight for it? Su Buling shook his head. If I didn't know Li Hanzheng would have killed me, and Ding Yuan obviously wanted to kill me for the Jade Seal. Let's not talk about the two of them, they are fighting to the death. The three of us represent the 3 kings of Su, Chu, and Wu. We had no hatred before, but after this incident, we will fight to the death. When Zhongli Jiju heard this, he immediately understood. That old man is fanning the flames. Su Buling nodded. Yes, there is nothing I can do even if I know. But it is good news that Qingyi came to pick me up with the fake jade seal. How did he know that you came out first? And from Yuechuo Island. 3 parties fought in a melee to grab the jade seal. After they succeeded, they would definitely run away and it was impossible to go back. The old master probably saw from some places that the exit was on Yuechuo Island, so he asked Qingyi to wait at the beach. If I come out first, it means he saw the right person. Help me put my worries aside. If Li Hanzhong and Ding Yuan come out first, King Yi will run to call someone to rescue me, of course, if I don't die in the underground palace. Ning Qingyi kept her eyes on the island until she couldn't see clearly, then she sat up in despair. Drag so many people into the water, stir up trouble everywhere, and stir up trouble in the world. What are you trying to do? Zhongli Jiju thought for a while and glanced at Su Buling. I want to be the emperor. Su Buling shook his head. The trend of the times cannot be avoided without human power. Without the old master to fan the flames, sooner or later there will be a fight. No one can stay out of it. If I don't seize the Jade Seal, King Su's lineage will be passive in the future. Even turning against the enemy there is no chance to fight. I don't want to get involved in this matter, but having a sword in my hand is better than not having it at all. The three of them were speechless and rowed the fishing boat together, heading towards Bodhi Island 6 miles away. With Ning Qingyi as a new force, the three of them moved very quickly. When they arrived near Bodhi Island, they saw several large and small ships parked on the edge of the island. Under the urging of the police, some civilians who came to the island mountain with hammers and pickaxes. Run over to Chiu. Among the crowd, Su Buling also found traces of Dainglu subordinates, mixed among the civilians, who seemed to be the rangers who came to help enthusiastically. Su Buling would definitely not dare to go ashore with the imperial seal, otherwise he would be hunted to death no matter which party found him. He returned the white skirt wrapped around him to Ning Qingyi. Qingyi, go find the people who fight Yinglu and tell them about the situation there. Go and rescue people quickly, and then come back with Nightingale. Don't reveal anything about Yuxi. We have to leave as soon as possible. Ning Qingyi didn't waste any time and quickly rowed the boat to the rocks, then jumped onto the island and ran towards the crowd. Yutuo Island. Heavy snow and waves swept across the beach, and black blood was scattered on the white snow. 3 swords were stuck on the ground, one of which was stuck under Zheng Yushan's ribs. It passed through the body and came out from the lower back, piercing the water from the underground river flowed out of the wine bag at his waist and quickly turned into ice. Qiu Fengqing's right chest was stabbed with a bloody hole by the steel gun that had turned into an iron rod. The blood was almost flowing. His left hand still grabbed the back of Ding Yuan's neck, and the 2 corpses were frozen together. Hoo-ho! The sound of heavy breathing with blood foam was sometimes rapid and slow, and white mist sprayed from the mouth and nose. Chen Chong, the spear god of northern Xinjiang, was sitting under a big rock, with his iron gun lying on his side. There were cracks on the stone behind him, apparently from a slap. There were several claw marks on his chest, and there was blood in his mouth and nose. Drip down. It's so humming awesome. It seems that I am not the best in the world. You guys have left some strength down there. Chen Daozai's little grandson actually escaped. Bah, cough cough. The intermittent words came out. He may still have the strength, but he no longer wants to fight. Perhaps at the last moment of his life, it is more practical to say a few words of complaint than to struggle in vain. In front of the boulder, Li Hanzhong was holding a blood-red jade seal with his left hand. There were drops of blood on the fingertips of his right hand falling on the snow. However, his figure was as straight as a pine tree, condescending, and his eyes were cold. Li Hanzheng's scholar's robe had already been taken off underground. There were more than a dozen wounds on his body. The most dangerous one was half an inch below his heart. Blood was still oozing, but his body was motionless. It seemed that the wounds were not on him. It doesn't make much difference whether I kill you or not. My target is Yuxi, not you. Haha, I'm convinced, I'm convinced. Chen Chong coughed up a mouthful of blood, raised his neck, and closed his eyes. Let's do it, be quick. I didn't look at the almanac when I went out this time. Li Hanzheng's eyes were cold. He glanced at the bodies of Zheng Yushan and Qiu Fengqing, paused for a moment, and then returned to Chen Chong. You have repaid the favor you owed King Chu. How about following Yinglu from now on? Ahem. Chen Chong coughed twice, opened his eyes, glanced at Li Hanzhong standing in front of him, was silent for a moment, and nodded. Okay, whatever you say is what you always say, the strong are respected. Li Hanzhong took a breath, turned around and walked towards the seaside, holding a bloody jade seal in his hand, looking at the other side's coast. After a while, he walked forward and broke through the sea. Chen Chong leaned on the stone to relax for a long time, wiped his lips with his scarred arm, climbed up with the iron gun in his hand, looked at the iron gun that was already an iron rod in his hand, hesitated for a moment, and threw it on the beach. Thank you for reading Garfield on QQ and being rewarded by the leader. The big update of 12,000, the bosses would like to give this chapter a thumbs up. We are still 2,700 short of 1 star in Masterpiece Hall, and we are at 90% progress. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 534. It was already noon when we returned to the inn. Nightingale contacted the government to recruit people to dig the stone wall. It was estimated that they had reached the deep underground. If Ning Qingyi went down to search, it would take some time to come back. Although only 1 day had passed, for Su Buling and Zhongli Jiju, it was no different from licking blood on the edge of a knife for several years. Returning to a slightly safer place, they relaxed their tense hearts and no longer had the strength. The doors and windows of the room in the inn were closed, and the jade seal was placed in a box with the packed clothes and sheets. Su Buling was wrapped in a thick quilt, his wet hair was hanging down, and he took a long untouched wine gourd and drank strong liquor. The small table was full of food, roast chicken, lamb legs, etc., all of which were bought by Zhongli Jiju just now. The food in the small border town was not delicious, but at this time, there was no such thing as eating fine food and eating delicate food. Zhongli Jiju changed into a new dress and sat opposite Su Buling. She had been emotionally fluctuating for a short period of time and had not yet recovered. However, she ate very politely. She cut the mutton with a dagger, put it in the 2 bowls, and ate slowly. The room was very quiet, and only a little noise from the street outside could be heard. Zhongli Jiju chewed slowly, occasionally looking up, and saw Su Buling eating heartily without saying a word. I don't know if she felt the atmosphere was awkward, so she made small talk. I will never go underground in this life, it's better to die on the street than to die of suffocation underground. Su Buling's physical strength was replenished, and his complexion had returned to normal at this time. He smiled and said, "Yes, I didn't expect there was such a large underground palace under Bodhi Island. I'm sorry to scare you this time. My wife. You are talking about something else." Zhongli Jiju put down her chopsticks, her expression slightly tangled, her eyebrows slightly frowned, and she spoke without much momentum. "Sister, I said I was joking, you also know the situation. When people are very nervous, they will do things that they would not do normally. You are taking advantage of others' misfortune." Taking advantage of others' misfortune? Su Buling narrowed his eyes slightly. Do you think worshipping heaven and earth is a child's play? Well, just pretend it never happened. As he said that, he took out the jade pendant of love from his arms, opened the window and prepared to throw it out. Wait. Zhongli Jiju's body stiffened, and she stood up quickly, grabbing Su Buling's arm with some annoyance. Why are you like this? After all, it's a souvenir left behind from the hardships together. Su Buling's eyes were slightly cold. After eating and drinking enough and warming up, it was time to think about business. Realizing that Su Buling's eyes were very sharp, Zhongli Jiju was a little afraid to look directly at him. She wanted to take back her hand, but was held back by Su Buling. Su Buling stood up, pulled Zhongli Jiju in front of him with a little force, and said condescendingly, "We are all adults, you have to be responsible for what you say and do. Go over and lie down. Lie down." Lie down is fine. Zhongli Jiju shrank her hands, glanced at the embroidery bed that Su Buling pointed at, and suddenly became nervous and anxious, shaking her head vigorously. I won't. Su Buling, don't be too presumptuous, sister. I'll poison you. As she said this, she wanted to touch the dragon-locking goo placed between the two balls. Let me help you. Su Buling was tough, his left hand was around Zhongli Jiju's waist, and his right hand was touching Zhongli Jiju's collar. Ah, you. Zhongli Jiju's face flushed, and she grabbed Su Buling's hand, almost crying. Don't mess around, King Yi is coming back, and we have to escape, there is no time. Su Buling held Tuaner and frowned, saying, okay, let's consummate the marriage after leaving Leading County. Do you have any objection to this? Zhongli Jiju was confused and didn't dare to look into Su Buling's eyes, and her voice was very low. Okay, okay. Su Buling pinched it slightly, say husband, I know I was wrong. Zhongli Jiju was taken advantage of and bullied, and she was not convinced anymore. She twisted her shoulders gently, what did I do wrong? Let me go, stop rubbing. Say it or not. Woo, you naughty boy, okay, okay, husband, I know I was wrong, okay. Su Buling then let go of his hand and nodded with satisfaction, little Ju is good. What little Ju? Jiju is Jiju. Zhongli Jiju straightened her clothes, curled her hands on her chest, and had a mixed expression. She gave herself away for no reason, and she still felt a little dreamy. I was happy, but I couldn't tell. I regretted it, I didn't regret it, but it was weird anyway. Su Buling raised his hand to straighten the gold hairpin on Zhongli Jiju's head, then turned around to take out paper and pen, and began to write. The tip of the pen slid across the paper, and the room was extremely quiet. Zhongli Jiju stood in the corner, hesitating for a moment, and found Su Buling writing under the blanket. Out of curiosity, he walked up to him. What are you writing? Call me husband, how many times do I have to say it? Husband, what are you writing? Read it yourself. Zhongli Jiju pursed her lips and said a few words silently. Judging from her mouth shape, it should be what's your attitude? She leaned forward and looked at it carefully, but saw the following written on the paper. Two surnames are united in marriage, a contract is signed in one hall, a good marriage is forever, and a match is the same name. Marriage certificate. Zhongli Jiju's fox-like eyes showed a bit of shame and annoyance. Are you serious? Let's think about it carefully. We've already worshipped the heaven and earth, and you forced me to do it, what else are you considering? Su Buling's voice was flat. He finished writing the marriage certificate carefully, took out the ink pad, pressed his finger on it, and grabbed Zhongli Jiju's arm and pressed it into the ink pad. Be good, sign the contract of selling your body. Bah, what contract of selling your body? Zhongli Jiju wanted to die, and was completely passive. She didn't even have a reason to refute. Her wrist was held and she couldn't break free. She didn't dare to let the bug bite her. After pulling and tugging for a few times, her thumb was still pressed on the ink pad, and then pressed on the paper. Wait, wait. Zhongli Jiju closed her eyes, and her delicate face was full of tension. Let me think about it again, just for a moment. 3, 2, 1. Puff. The fingers pressed on the paper, and the two bright red guidelines came together. Zhongli Jiju's body froze instantly. This time it was written in black and white. Even if you take it to the Nanya government, you have to recognize it. No, there is no notary. Zhongli Jiju wanted to say a few more words, but then he saw Su Buling took out the imperial seal, smeared it with ink, and then held the seal in his hand and solemnly stamped it on the marriage certificate. A solemn and awe-inspiring seal appeared. Mandated by heaven, long live and prosper. I think nothing in the world is more credible than this seal. Seeing that she had become Su Buling's woman, Zhongli Jiju felt guilty and thought. Su, Xiang, hey, I have to go back. Marrying without telling you means I will have no offspring. Even if I don't go back to the village, I have to discuss it with Chuchu. Isn't it a bit too hasty for such a big thing? Su Buling put away the marriage certificate, put it in his arms and patted it. My wife, please do as you please. Anyway, even if you tell the king of hell, you are my legitimate wife. You can figure out how to explain it to others. Zhongli Jiju wanted to lose her temper, but she didn't dare to. At this point, she hesitated and said resignedly. Be nice to me, and I will agree to you. How do you mean nice? Like, when you were close to me, I was on top and you were on the bottom. You came to pursue me, but you can't be so condescending and treat me like a concubine. I don't like it. Su Buling looked satisfied, walked up to him, and nodded seriously. Okay, you'll be on top from now on. Can I be mean to you? Don't spank me. Okay. After getting permission, Zhongli Jiju finally became a little tougher. Her clothes rose and fell several times, revealing her usual appearance. She hugged her arms and snorted. Su Buling, why are you so heartless? You're always asking for more. I've used all my dragon-locking poison on you, and I've even given you to serve the girls at home. Don't you feel bad for treating me like this? Su Buling laughed, supported Zhongli Jiju's shoulders, and sat down at the table. It's so uncomfortable. Let's eat. We have to go on the road later. Zhongli Jiju sat opposite, fidgeting. Seeing Su Buling's nonchalant look, the more she thought about it, the more she felt at a disadvantage, but she had nothing to say. After a while, she frowned and said, Hey. Tell me again about the elopement of Ling Keichin and Fei. I didn't hear it clearly last night. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 535. On the abandoned pier by the seaside, people are still gathering on Bodhi Island. Su Buling came to look for the jade seal of the country. This matter must not be known to the officials. Nightingale made up a random reason and paid several thousand taels of silver. The magistrate of leading county did not ask a single question, and almost all the strong men in the county were told. They were all brought here. Su Buling was almost back, and Nightingale had no need to stay. She and Ning Qingyi took the ferry back to the ferry and headed towards the inn where they were staying. Zulu has already led people to Yuechuo Island. The specific situation is unknown. Ning Qingyi, in her white skirt, is hunting in the wind. She keeps looking back at the distance on the sea. She may also want to know whether Li Hanzheng is dead or alive, but it is just so far away. Where can I see it clearly? The little sparrow landed on the nightingale's shoulder. After flying outside for a day, it was cold and hungry. It was already wilted. It huddled under the nightingale's neck. From time to time, it looked at Ning Qingyi's chest, as if it wanted to get in to keep warm, but it knew this. The woman didn't have a good relationship with her master, so she didn't dare to look down at the nightingale's breasts, or not. Nightingale walked quickly and saw that Ning Qingyi was a little lost in thought, and said doubtfully, Miss Ning, is there anything else? Nothing, just looking. Ning Qingyi is tall and slender, a bit taller than Nightingale, like a big sister walking beside her. After watching carefully for a long time, until the ship turned into a black dot on the sea level stopped, and the figures on the ship jumped out to fish for people, I felt a little calmer. Although she hated Li Han deeply, Ning Qingyi couldn't help but admire this martial arts prodigy. It only took less than 10 years for her to grow from a weak scholar to a powerful figure. And she had been practicing martial arts for as long as she could remember. Just a small fish and shrimp in the rivers and lakes. If there is anyone who can fight out of the desperate situation just now, in Ning Qingyi's image, apart from Su Buling who dared to kill the dragon in Chang'an, there is only this father who gave up his writing and became a martial artist and reached the top of the martial arts. Ning Qingyi's half-body talent is not bad. After a year of hard training, she can probably be on par with Zhang Xiang. But for her, the world in front of her is too big. Compared with Manji, Yufu, and others, she can only run away. The difference is faster. If the desperate situation on Yuechuo Island could not help Li Hanzheng, what could she do even if she spent her whole life trying to prevent Li Hanzheng from admitting his mistake? A touch of disappointment lingered in her heart. Fortunately, Ning Qingyi put these things aside and did not think about it. As long as she practiced martial arts seriously, she would catch up one day. Ning Qingyi put away her thoughts, turned her head and asked, "Nightingale, how come that woman is with Su Buling? They seem to be very close." Nightingale was clear in her mind, but there were some things that a maid couldn't talk nonsense about. She blinked. "Miss Ning, why are you asking this?" Ning Qingyi's cold face did not change at all. "Su Buring is my junior brother, so I naturally have to pay attention to some things. That woman Zhongli Jiju is very, very shameless. I'm afraid that Su Buring will be deceived." Nightingale's lips curved with a hint of a smile. "Sister Dazhong is actually quite good, but she's very playful and informal. Once you get used to it, it's actually quite interesting." Ning Qingyi snorted lightly. "She is very narrow-minded. Back then in Changqing Temple, she wanted to be the 8th leader, even though my master was so angry that he chased and slashed with his sword, but it was useless. My master and I used to like to hang out in the water pool. I have to take a bath in the house, but now I hide in the house when I take a bath. I have to check if there is any itching powder first. I am afraid of being bitten by a snake for 10 years. Nightingale heard Manzi say these things and got a lot of benefits from Zhongli Jiju. She was embarrassed to say that he was naughty, so she thought about it. "Well, my young master is very powerful. He has always bullied women. How can a woman be deceived if she pleases him? Miss Ning, please rest assured." "That's true." Ning Qingyi quite agreed with this. In her memory, Su Buling always had a cold and extraordinary look, which fascinated Manji and Chu Chu. It was also in front of her that he would put down his princely style and turn his glib tongue around. "Please." Thinking of this, Ning Qingyi's eyes became a bit proud for some unknown reason, and she looked away without speaking. The two people quickly returned to the inn. As soon as they walked into the corridor, they heard voices coming from the room. "Why are you just talking about Nai Xiaoqian? Where has Su Xian gone? You don't want his wife anymore. Are you listening carefully? Su Xian is White Snake's husband. Are you hurting me again? You promised not to hurt me." There was a bit of annoyance in his tone, which was annoying. When Ning Qingyi heard the shameless words that went too far, she immediately became angry, thinking that Zhongli Jiju was seducing Su Buling, so she quickly walked over and opened the door. "Ye Juniang, how old are you?" Looking up, Su Buling was sitting on a chair in the small room, wrapped in a quilt. Zhongli Jiju stood next to Su Buling, with her back to her, tinkering with something with her hands, which looked strange. Ning Qingyi's head was full of questions and she glanced left and right. "What are you doing?" Su Buling smiled and said, "Let's talk about some worldly affairs and have a meal by the way." Zhongli Jiju tidied up her clothes that were still messed up, turned around, and showed a very friendly smile. "Qingyi is back. Are you, Li Hanzheng, okay?" Ning Qingyi's expression was calm. He was cold to everyone, and there was nothing strange about him. He said calmly, "I guess it's okay. Have you guys rested well? There is such a big movement, the news will spread throughout the world soon, and the imperial court will probably know about it, so we need to leave early. This is a wrong place." Su Buling nodded. He was worried that Li Hanzheng and others would find out that the jade seal was fake and come back to grab it, and he was also worried that the court would find out something. Now that the jade seal was in hand, the most urgent thing must be to rush back to Suzhou. If you don't have hundreds of thousands of troops under your command, you will basically be eaten alive. Let's go. Xiao Qi and the others should have just arrived in Binzhou. Find a way to contact them and tell them not to sail the boat to Bodhi Island. We will go to Dao'erkao town to wait for them. Nightingale walked in from the door. Because she had seen a lot, she saw the slight blush on Zhongli Jiju's face and her unstable breath, so she knew that she must have been rubbed and touched just now. Her eyes showed a bit of weirdness. She coughed lightly and said seriously, "At sea, without a pigeon to send a message, it may be difficult to contact." Pigeon to send a message? The tool bird that just jumped off Nightingale's shoulder and flew into Zhongli Jiju's arms raised its little head. Although it couldn't speak, its stunned look well showed the fear in its heart. Zhongli Jiju touched the little sparrow's head. "Tell me about its general direction. It has lived on your boat before, so I recognize it. But you can only let it go after you get to the mouth of the steep river, otherwise it won't know where to go back to." Su Buling felt relieved, and suddenly felt that this bird was more capable than Jiju, but he certainly didn't dare to say that. He stood up, took out the map and followed the route to determine the approximate distance and position of Xiao Qi's ship. Nightingale stayed with the little sparrow yesterday, and especially liked this extremely smart little helper. He glanced at it with envy. "Sister Jiju, can you raise a little sparrow for me too?" Su Buling actually liked it very much, and smiled and said, "After returning to Suzhou, get a few Saker falcons, one for each of us, and let Jiju raise them." This clearly means that Zhongli Jiju will live with Su Buling for a long time. Ning Qingyi stood behind, wanting to say something, but hesitated, and finally said nothing. "I'll post the rest during the day, I haven't finished writing yet." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 536. The mouth of Dao'erhe River is only 100 miles away, not too far. Su Buling and his 4 men galloped at full speed and arrived at Dao'erkao town at nightfall. After writing a note and tying it to the well-fed little sparrow, he ignored the little sparrow's eyes and let it go, and then waited in the inn where he stayed to prevent the little sparrow from finding its master. The wedding boat set out from Binzhou and followed the coastline channel. It was about 400 miles to Dao'erkao. Sparrows are smarter than birds, but they are not good at long-distance flying. Even the fine breeds carefully cultivated by Zhongli Jiju need time to go over. It may take until tomorrow for the sparrow to send the letter back. Dao'erkao town is a coastal wharf. It is not easy to go out to sea in the cold winter. A large number of ships are moored in the port. The town is brightly lit. Local fishermen and boatmen who make a living by the sea are idle at home. The market in the town is very lively. As the new year is approaching, there are dragon and lion dance teams walking through the streets. After running for hundreds of miles, the 4 of them were exhausted and went back to their rooms to rest and adjust the fatigue caused by hunger and cold in the past few days. Su Buling was really tired in the past 2 days. He fell asleep on the pillow until the dead of night, when the sound of horse hooves suddenly rang out on the street outside the window, waking him up again. Dingling dingling dingling. The sound of horseshoes stepping on the street and the bells was very crisp, completely different from ordinary horses. Su Buling was very familiar with this sound. He turned his head and opened the window to take a look. He saw a messenger with a yellow flag on his back running across the street and disappeared at the end of his sight. It is self-evident how serious it would be if someone found out that he was carrying the imperial seal. The reason why Su Buling settled here was because this place was the only way for the north-south official road, and any movement could be discovered at the first time. The yellow flag behind means the 800 Li rush. The messengers who fail to arrive on time or those who block the messengers will be punished for delaying military intelligence, and their entire family will be executed. Generally, the yellow flag will be raised only when there is a major incident at the border. Su Buling is very familiar with this process. The messenger in front of him came from Liaxi. Either the Liaxi Protectorate has an urgent war report, or he has informed Chang'an City about the Bodhi Island. Su Buling stood at the window and thought for a while, thinking that the possibility of the Bodhi Island incident was greater. The yellow flag behind is usually a secret report. The code words in different places are different. Without the code book of the Ministry of War, it is impossible to understand the messenger even if you hijack him, and it will also cause the messenger's family to lose their heads. If there is really a mess at the border, this move will harm countless people and soldiers at the border. After all, Su Buling was born in a general family. After hesitating for a moment, he still did not do such a thing that would anger the heavens and the people. He just kept this matter in mind for the time being. It was already dark, and it was probably 3 o'clock in the morning. Su Buling closed the window and prepared to lie back in bed to continue warming the bed for the little nightingale, but he was no longer sleepy when he woke up. He was awake. Su Buling blinked his eyes, searched for a few things in the room, walked out of the door quietly, came to the door of Zhongli Jiju next door, and knocked gently. The long night was silent. The oil lamp in the in-room had been extinguished. After Zhongli Jiju washed up, she lay on the pillow with her clothes on, holding a few small bottles in her hands, and she didn't dare to fall asleep. In the underground stone chamber, inexplicably, Su Buling and I worshipped the heaven and earth. Now that it was late at night and everyone was asleep, I felt like I was crazy. But I had already worshipped the heaven and earth, and even signed the marriage certificate. Even if I went to the king of hell, I would be Su Buling's wife. It seemed useless to regret it. In fact, I didn't regret it, but I felt that I was wronged. Zhongli Jiju bit her lower lip and sighed faintly, with a complicated face. At first, she approached Su Buling to compete with Ning Yuhi. But after so many things happened, how could she not feel anything at all? Let's not talk about anything else, just talking about the siege in Longtan. Su Buling ran here directly for 100 miles just in case without being sure whether it was her, and almost killed the chasing wind horse. A chasing wind horse is worth more than 10,000 gold. It is not impossible to exchange a city in Nanyu. How many people in the world can do this for someone they know? Zhongli Jiju was very moved at that time and was willing to hug Su Buling to keep him warm. In fact, she already liked this strong and warm man. When she was on Bodhi Island, Su Buling protected her everywhere, and she saw it all. At that time, she was scared and wanted to talk and listen to others talk. Su Buling told her stories when there was not much water, and his mouth was dry. In that desperate situation, wasting energy and water to gossip can be said to be comforting her at the cost of his remaining life. When Zhongli Jiju recalled it now, she wanted to slap herself twice, wondering why she was so unreasonable and heartless. She could have held on for a while longer if she had kept calm and didn't say anything, but she insisted on making trouble. Seeing Su Buling talking non-stop, she didn't know how to stop him, but just listened stupidly. After surviving the disaster, Zhongli Jiju felt scared in her heart. If the mechanism was really damaged at that time, it would only take a quarter of an hour for rescue to break through the stone wall, but Su Buling didn't hold on for the last little bit of time because of these insignificant things. It would be better if she died. If she survived under Su Buling's care, she didn't dare to think about how much regret she would have in the second half of her life. I'm afraid she wouldn't even dare to die. Recalling these big and small things, Zhongli Jiju knew very well that compared with power, wealth, and even life, Su Buling cared more about the people around him. In order to let her live for half a minute longer, what chance of life can she give up? Why should she hesitate? However, she still feels a little bit wronged. Why should I be ranked behind Ning Yuhi? Zhongli Jiju looked at the top of the curtain with her eyes, sighed faintly, and didn't know what she was thinking. Rather than saying that she was entangled, it might be more appropriate to say that she was afraid. How could a girl not be afraid when getting married? She was still a virgin and had to spend the bridal chamber. After arriving at the inn, she was afraid that Su Buling would run in and mess around. She didn't know how to face it or what to do. She was a little resistant in her heart, but when she washed up, she still washed inside and out several times, for fear that when Su Buling took off his clothes, he would find that she was not clean, thus leaving some bad flaws on the most important night of her life. After all, he was her husband. The more she thought about it, the more flustered she became, and she couldn't sleep at all. Zhongli Jiju held the small bottle and wanted to get up and sneak away to hide in the martial arts world for a while, but she didn't dare to do so when she thought of the consequences of being discovered by Su Buling. She could only lie there with a confused heart. Fortunately, Su Buling was very tired. He didn't come so late. He must have fallen asleep and forgotten about the marriage consummation. It was getting later and later. It was already past midnight. Zhongli Jiju felt a little relieved. She thought she should have escaped tonight. She raised her hand to undress and go to bed. Unexpectedly, at this moment, there was a sudden noise from the door. Dong dong. Someone knocked on the door. Zhongli Jiju's slightly charming face suddenly froze. She didn't dare to breathe and closed her eyes, pretending not to hear. Dong dong. The door rang again. Zhongli Jiju was almost crying in anxiety. How could she dare to respond? If she responded, she would be in vain and her virginity would be broken. How painful it would be. There was poison on the door. He definitely didn't dare to come in. He just pretended not to hear. Jiju, if you keep breaking your promise, I will tear up the marriage certificate. The man's calm words came from the door. Tear up the marriage certificate? Zhongli Jiju's eyelashes trembled, and she clenched her hands tightly and struggled for a long time, and finally slowly turned the page. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 537. Step, step. With slight steps, he moved to the door. Zhongli Jiju tidied the hair around his ears and said softly through the door. Mr. Su, you don't sleep at night, what are you doing here, sister? There was a slight tremor in his tone, obviously trying to stay calm. We agreed to go somewhere to consummate the marriage, could it be possible that you forgot about it? Zhongli Jiju's breathing was up and down. Her personality wanted to be stronger and refuse, but her rationality prevented her from being too presumptuous. After a moment of silence, she raised her hand and opened the door bolt. Squeak. The door opened, and Su Buling, wearing a white young master's robe, walked in from the outside and closed the door smoothly. Woo dash. Zhongli Jiju trembled in fright, curled her hands on her chest, and slowly stepped back. Su Buletin, you can't be presumptuous, sister, I'm not the kind of casual woman, you can pursue me if you like me. I can do it too, but you can't force me to do anything. With trembling words, he took 2 or 3 steps back to the other end of the house and leaned against the window. Su Buling's expression was calm. He held 2 candles and a wine gourd in his hands. He did not look at Zhongli Jiju wantonly. He walked to the table, lit the 2 red candles with a fire stick, picked up the wine glass and poured 2 glasses of wine, and then he took out the white handkerchief and put it under the quilt. Methodical and silent. Zhongli Jiju's voice gradually became softer, his hands were held tightly, and his red lips seemed to be bitten. I feel like a fish on the chopping board, about to be cooked, but I can't struggle, and I don't know how to resist. After Su Buling arranged the wedding room, he turned around, straightened his clothes, raised his hand and said, Madam, come and sit down. The voice is gentle and the smile is full of smiles. Zhonglijiju's eyes were filled with a bit of resistance, but he kept moving, walking slowly in small steps, and walked to Su Buring. Ms. Su, please forgive me. I am several years older than you, and I have never been married. Su Buling held Zhonglijiju's wrist, pushed her down on the bed and sat down. He took 2 white porcelain wine glasses from the table and handed one to her. Madam, I've treated you badly. I'll make up for the wedding ceremony after we return to Suzhou. We can make it as big as you want. Zhonglijuju pursed her lips and looked at the handsome face under the red candle. Thank you, what's wrong with me? I'm not a girl from an aristocratic family, just a wild girl in the world, but we South Vietnamese girls love her very much. Dare to love dares to hate, if you dare to betray me, I will not spare you. The words were soft and without any force. The beautiful lady sat under the red candle, her mutton-fat jade-like cheeks were stained with a slight blush, and her eyes were naturally a bit foxy, like that seductive little goblin, but the look in her eyes was far more beautiful than anything in the world. The chaste and fierce woman was even shyer, as if she was afraid that the man she would spend her whole life with would think she was an immodest woman. Even her usual cynical smile disappeared, and she pursed her lips lightly, showing a somewhat dignified and conservative look. The night of flowers and candles is always the most beautiful time for a woman. The light blue thin skirt wraps up her graceful figure. She sits neatly with her hands folded on her waist, and the moving curves outlined in the light and shadow are perfect. The high skirt is a bit tight, and it looks like she is wearing a belly band, which is rare. Her buttocks sitting on the white handkerchief make the skirt tight, and the flesh color is faintly visible under the candle light, which is indescribably alluring. Su Buling looked up and down, sat down beside him, and raised the wine glass in his hand. Madam, come here. Oh. Zhonglijuju put her arm through Su Buling's elbow and drank a glass of wine. The spicy wine made her frown. She relaxed a little, put down the wine glass, and sat there not knowing what to do. Su Buring raised his hand and put down the curtain, and gently pushed Zhonglijuju's shoulder. Woo! Zhonglijuju's expression was tense, and he didn't know how he fell on the pillow. He wanted to move to the inside to hide, but then he remembered that all the men in the Central Plains were sleeping on the inside. For a moment, he folded his hands on his waist and did not dare to move. With a smile on his face, Su Buling sat down next to him and held his feet under his skirt. Zhonglijuju quickly closed her eyes, arched her instep slightly, and shrank slightly. Why don't you forget it? Relax, you're not going to the execution ground. You usually look best when you are generous, but now it's boring to be so coquettish. Su Buling took off his embroidered shoes with patterns and pulled down his tube socks, revealing his white and crystal clear feet. The soft voice on his lips calmed Zhonglijuju's emotions. I'm going to be beaten by you, I'm just a woman, how can I not be nervous? Zhonglijuju clasped her hands together tightly, opened her eyes slightly, and stared at the back of the man sitting next to her. Her gentle movements and words did make her feel a little more at ease. She took a few hard breaths and wanted to speak, but she couldn't. No way to tell. Su Buling held his cold feet and warmed them a little before pulling up the quilt, covering Zhonglijuju, and then lay down in it. Squeak. The old bed in the inn sank slightly and made a slight sound. Zhonglijuju's body tensed up, trying to escape, but he didn't dare to move. She felt Su Buring leaning against her side, pressing against her tightly, and passing her arms from behind. She raised her hands slightly, standing between the two of them, and her voice trembled. Don't, with you. A woman who has always been sharp-tongued and cynical, who usually dared to say anything, was actually scared to tears at this moment. Su Buling had long since noticed that Zhonglijuju was just being tough with his words. He smiled secretly in his heart, hugged him a little tighter, and gently stroked his back with his palms. His voice was calm and gentle. You are so old and you are still crying. This is not the Sister Jeju I like. Sister Jeju. Yes, I am older than him, how could I be so unsatisfactory? Zhongli Jeju's eyes were filled with water, and his face was already red as an apple, but he forced himself to calm down, slowed down his breathing, and squeezed out a smile. I'm not afraid. What's the point of crying when my daughter's family gets married? I've seen a lot of medical skills and I've already understood this kind of thing. What's the big deal? Su Buling raised the corners of his mouth slightly and put his cheek against Zhongli Jeju's forehead. I don't believe it. Real. Zhongli Jeju was confused and extremely nervous, no better than being trapped in a stone room. He seemed to be afraid that if he stopped talking, he would face something big that he had never experienced before, so he couldn't control his words. I have read a lot of medical books. This kind of thing is actually for the purpose of carrying on the family line. It is normal for people and animals. In the village, there are some older ants who talk about these things all day long. On the lips, he came to me and asked me how to make men more powerful, which scared the men in my family to the point of weakness. Really? I haven't been to South Vietnam yet. Tell me about your family. I haven't heard you talk about it yet. The man's gentle voice lingered in the ears, without any lust, just a couple's night chat, which was both close and sweet. Zhongli Jeju didn't know why, but she couldn't resist this feeling at all. She slowly closed her hand between the two of them, put her forehead against Su Buling's cheek, and said in a quiet orchid voice. There's no reason, I was born in a village in South Vietnam. It's surrounded by high mountains and ridges, not far from Liu's Hu. The place is called Phi Shuling, and the village doesn't have a name, it's different from you in the Central Plains. The government basically controls once inside the mountain, each village is in charge of its own affairs, including clan elders, village masters, etc. The words were soft. After saying a few words, Zhongli Jeju seemed to be more settled, and her body slowly relaxed. My grandfather is a doctor in the village. It seems that he escaped from the outside during the war, so he brought a lot of medical books. I've been reading these since I was a child, and I also learned all kinds of stuff from the witches in other villages. My father followed my grandfather and didn't let me learn how to raise voodoos, use poisons, etc. When I grew up, I ran around alone in the mountains, learning whatever was powerful. I heard that Dragon Lokgu was powerful, so I went to more than a dozen villages to inquire and research, and then I figured it out on my own. Later, my parents went to the mountains to collect herbs. Something happened accidentally, and I became a loner. Because the mountains were too small, I had read about the bustling scene of the Central Plains in a book, so I wanted to come out and have a look. I was only 14 or 15 at the time, traveling across the two countries alone, and encountered many things. You must have heard of them all. Chu Chu was also robbed at that time. She was very well behaved when she was a child. Su Buling listened quietly, his hands gently caressing Zhongli Jeju's waist. After she completely relaxed, he gently opened the ties of her skirt. Zhongli Jeju was confused and didn't know what he was talking about. He just felt that time was passing quickly and slowly, and his thoughts could not be connected together. His breathing became more and more rapid, with a faint fragrance like orchid, until he finally stopped quietly, and just all that was left was a faint murmur. The candlelight was dim and the curtains showed subtle ripples. The room in the quiet winter night seemed to be isolated from the whole world. I don't know how much time passed before the man's words rang out. Madam, where did your leg ring go? That thing, taken it, can't you find medicine? You're so young, why? What nonsense are you talking about? It would look better if you put it on. Oh, then I'll bring it. It hurts, my dear brother, please don't. What a good brother, call me a good brother. I'm older than you, call me sister. Thank you English underline combination for the 15,000 reward. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 538. The long street of the ancient town fell into silence late at night. All the local residents had gone to bed, except for the watchman who occasionally walked under the eaves while banging his stick. Ah, woo. Ruiao's soft breathing came, and Ning Qingyi, who was lying on her back, opened her eyes and listened for a while, but there was no sound again, as if it was just an illusion. But if it was a hallucination, how could she have such a hallucination? Ning Qingyi frowned slightly, and her cold face looked a little strange. If she thought about it, she could only think of them as a young couple in a small town in a foreign land. Their love-making voice was accidentally louder in the middle of the night. There was no light in the room, and the inn's lanterns were printed on the window paper, dragging a few shadows in the room, swaying, making it even more lonely. Ning Qingyi's clear spring-like eyes looked at the lantern in the window. When she woke up in the middle of the night, she was no longer sleepy, just like she used to be alone in Changqing Temple and Junshan Island. In the dead of night, when people are quiet, thoughts are always the most active. All the big and small things that you would not think about during the day will come back to your mind, making it difficult to put them away, unable to sleep, and unable to think clearly. What am I doing? What will I do in the future? Apart from the revenge that is difficult to avenge in this life, there seems to be no meaning in living. By the way, Su Danking painted for me. I am Ba Kuei now. I forgot to tell Su Buling about this. He will probably be very surprised when he hears it. What's the use of him being surprised? I have nothing to do with him. Just thinking about it like this, I don't know how long it lasted. Ning Qingyi wanted to close her eyes and fall asleep, but found that the night was extremely long. The more she thought about it, the more upset she became. Finally, she opened the quilt, sat up, and looked at the door. People are social animals, no matter how cold they are, there are times when they want to chat. If master is not around, who can I talk to? Su Buletin Ling. Passing by Li Hansheng, Ning Qingyi's mood fluctuated greatly. Although she didn't know what to say, she still stood up. Under the dim light, Ning Qingyi was wearing a warm white lotus belly band, which was exactly the same as Ning Yuhi's. It was sewn by Ning Yuhi herself. She was not very good at women's red, so everything from clothes to shoes and socks were prepared by Ning Yuhi in her spare time. While putting on the white skirt, Ning Qingyi paused for a moment and glanced down. She has been famous for her natural beauty since she was a child. Ning Qingyi has an outstanding figure, which can be seen from the size comparison with Manzi. She is tall and has slender limbs. From her fingertips to her feet, she is perfect without any flaws. In Zinbaqui before there was any news, she was already a rare beauty in the world. Ning Qingyi didn't care much about these things in the past. She only thought about martial arts and revenge. She would never wear makeup and remain cold and aloof. But now that I have become the Baqui, I have to pay a little more attention. Thinking like this, Ning Qingyi raised her hands to hold her belly bands, and then quickly put her hands down, as if she was afraid of being seen by outsiders. I don't carry any rouge or gouache when I travel around the world. I don't even have a decent hairpin, so I can't seem to dress up. Ning Qingyi hesitated for a moment, arranged her hair with a comb, and tied it into an exquisite bun with hanging clouds. She put on a white skirt, dressed neatly, and walked out of the room. She wanted to take the sword with her, but she couldn't. Finally, I put it in the house. There were not many guests in the small inn, and the lobby door was closed, not even a waiter could be seen. There are only 4 upper rooms in total. Su Buring and Nightingale live in the middle, Ning Qingyi lives on the left, and Zhongli Jeju lives on the right. With this arrangement, Su Buring can break through the wall and come to help at any time if he is worried about something happening at night. Ning Qingyi's footsteps were light and soundless, like a ghost in white floating in the corridor. She came to the door of Su Buling's room, licked the hair beside her ears, and brewed her emotions for a while before raising her hand and knocking. "Junior brother, have you slept? I have something to talk to you about." She used the tone of an elder. After all, in the world of martial arts, senior brothers and sisters are the elders. She could not be allowed to be a senior sister talking softly to her junior brothers. The room was very quiet. After a while, the nightingale's muffled voice finally came to mind. "Young master is asleep, is there anything wrong with Miss Ning?" Ning Qingyi frowned slightly. There was a wall between them. Su Buling's martial arts skills were so high. Even if he really fell asleep, he would have to wake up. He asked the maid to refuse the guest. It was obvious that he didn't want to see her. Ning Qingyi's personality has always been straightforward. If the other party doesn't want to see her, she will naturally not be hot-faced and cold-hearted. She responds softly, "I know," then turns and walks to her room. However, after taking 2 steps, Ning Qingyi paused again. She was already feeling depressed and wanted to talk to someone, but when she was rejected, she naturally became even more upset. She clenched her fists, looked back at Zonglijiju's room, thought for a moment, walked over and raised her hand to knock. "Hey, are you asleep?" "Yeah." The response this time was quick. Zonglijuju seemed startled and let out a low cry, then quietly, as if she was pretending to sleep, snored. Ning Qingyi couldn't say yes or no, but she was not polite to Zonglijuju at all. When she saw that Zonglijuju was awake and pretending to be asleep, she covered her face with her sleeves and gently opened the door. Naturally, there is no hidden weapon on the door. After Ning Qingyi made sure she wasn't trapped, she stepped into the house. The room was dark, with nothing else but tables and chairs. The curtain on the bed inside was lowered and tightly covered. There was a pair of embroidered shoes on the floor. It seemed that he had indeed rested. Ning Qingyi walked to the table and sat down, sitting upright, and said calmly, "Ye Juniang, let me tell you something." Rustling, rustling. Behind the curtain, Zonglijuju seemed to turn over, and a slightly sleepy and tired voice sounded. "Qingyi, why are you here so late? I've already gone to bed. It's cold, so I won't get up." The voice was strange and depressing, as if he was holding back pain. Ning Qingyi frowned slightly, stood up, and walked towards the curtain. "Are you injured?" "No." The voice behind the curtain sounded a bit anxious, "I just woke up. I was very tired the past few days and I don't want to move." "Forget it, I'd better get up." When Ning Qingyi heard this, she naturally did not open the curtain anymore, turned around and sat down, and her voice became softer. "No need to get up, I just came over to talk to you about something, excuse me for disturbing you." Rustling. Zonglijuju opened a corner of the curtain, lying on her side, with only her cheek peeking out from the hem of the curtain. She seemed to be wrapped tightly for fear of the cold, and smiled softly, "Tell me." Ning Qingyi glanced around and found Zonglijuju's cheeks were red and there were some beads of sweat, and asked doubtfully, "Are you very hot?" "I'm afraid of the cold, so the quilt is thicker." "Oh." Ning Qingyi nodded and said seriously, "I came here, just to talk to you about Su Buling." "Why are you approaching Su Buling? I know you are not a big evil person, but you have a lot of small problems. I am Su Buling's senior sister, and I always have to care about him. Su Buling needs your help. It's hard for Master and I to say anything. Let's put aside the past grudges for the time being, but if you have bad intentions, you want to treat Su Buling if you have bad intentions, I will still deal with you. Planning something evil? I was almost tortured to death." Zonglijuju felt sore all over and felt miserable. He forced himself to calm down and smiled, "Your master and I were just joking around." There were indeed some inappropriate and annoying things back then, but now we have long since thought about it. Approaching Su Buling, I want to recruit a disciple to compete with your master. As expected. No. I've thought about it and won't argue with your master anymore. People in the world are just trying to make a living, so why don't you give me such a high price and just use the money to do things? Ning Qingyi frowned slightly and thought for a moment. There seemed to be no problem with the logic. She was just feeling depressed and wanted to find someone to chat with, but now that she had no topic, she felt a little embarrassed. Ning Qingyi thought for a moment and glanced at the red candle on the table. The red candle had burned out, leaving a few candle tears. She wondered. How do you light two candles? Zhongli Jiju frowned, gently pushed her husband who was messing around behind him, and said with a difficult smile. Su Buling gave me a lot of money. I don't know how to spend it. Click 1 to see. I'm happy. Ill. Ning Qingyi was speechless. She looked to the side and saw the tea green wine gourd on the table. It was Su Buling's wine gourd, and she naturally recognized it. Ning Qingyi frowned. Is Su Buling here just now? Zhongli Jiju bit her lower lip, breathing a little unsteadily. He's been here, he had injuries on his body, I showed him, and he wanted to use wine as a medicine introduction. It was fine at night, so I left the wine come down and have a few sips to relieve your boredom. Ning Qingyi looked at the tea green wine gourd and thought of something, her eyes suddenly lost focus. Well, his wine gourd was scarlet in the past and he gave it to Miss Song, when we were in Chang'an, he saved my life and even gave me a sip. The wine gourd was very beautiful. Zhongli Jiju was embarrassed and speechless. Hearing this, he quickly answered. If you like it, take it. Ning Qingyi's eyes were full of confusion, and she turned around. It's not your wine gourd, how can you give it to me? Zhongli Jiju couldn't bear it any longer. With the help of turning over, he pinched his back hard and said softly. Su Buling doesn't drink anymore. The wine gourd is left unused. I wanted to use it to fill the medicine, but he refused. He said that he was going to give it to you. He never had the chance to speak. You happen to be here today, and I would like to mention by the way. Oh. Ning Qingyi was half convinced and glanced at the wine gourd, but did not reach out to take it. He just said lightly. If you want to give it to him, just give it to him. The grown man is still so coy. I'm afraid you won't want it. Ning Qingyi blinked her eyes, feeling strange. She didn't want to talk to Zhongli Jiju about these personal matters, so she stood up and said, Excuse me, please go to sleep first. After that, she walked out. Zhongli Jiju secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Just when she was about to be pulled back, Ning Qingyi suddenly stopped in front of the door again, scaring her almost to death. Qingyi, what's wrong? Well, don't talk to Su Buling about the wine gourd. He can just give it away if he wants. If I know, I can't help but give it away. Oh, I understand. Squeak. The door closed, the footsteps faded away, and the room became quiet. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 539. The ship used by the Su family to welcome their bride was not a sea-going ship. It did not dare to go deep into the ocean and kept sailing close to the coast. The waves on the sea were undulating, and the cold wind blew against the snow foam, making it difficult to stand on the bow of the boat. However, the coast is not as fertile as the south of the Yangtze River. It takes a long time for the barren mountains and ridges to see any light, and there is nothing interesting to see. In the cabin of the shipbuilding, Zhu Manzi, who had just boarded the ship, was staying in Song Yufu's room, holding a finely crafted telescope in his hand, looking at the pitch-black coast, and murmuring softly. "This thing is not as magical as you said, you can't see anything." Song Yufo held a book of poems and leaned on the carved wooden floor. She felt tired after sitting on the boat for too long, and responded listlessly. "It's late at night, and it's snowing again, so you won't be able to see anything. If it's a clear day, you can see the rabbit on the moon, it's really close. Can you see Chang'e? Compared with me, my Xiaoning, who is more beautiful?" Song Yufo naturally didn't see it, but after thinking about it carefully, she said seriously. "Chang'e is a deity. The book says that deities are pure-hearted and have no flaws." When Zhu Manzi heard this, he frowned, put down the telescope, walked to Song Yufo and sat down. "Xiao Song, are you saying that Xiaoning has flaws?" Song Yufo sat up straighter. No, I'll just say it casually." Zhu Manzi looked silly, but he was smart at heart. He noticed that Song Yufo's expression was wrong, so he changed his mind slightly and acted serious. "Miss Song, I know you also like Mr. Su, but you can't secretly exclude him just because you like him. This is not good." When Song Yufo heard this, she immediately became anxious. Women are most taboo with words and jealousy. Seeing that the silly Manzi had misunderstood her, she quickly took Manzi's hand. "Girl, please don't talk nonsense, I'm not excluding Qing yet. Then why do you think Xiaoning has flaws? She is as pure as a fairy." "Well." Song Yufo didn't know how to explain it, so she hesitated for a moment. Qingyi was not on the boat anyway, so she whispered. "It's not a flaw, it's just unethical, I tell you, you must never tell others, otherwise, Miss Ning's reputation will be completely ruined." Zhu Manzi blinked his big eyes and nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. "Don't worry, Miss Song, I am a woman from the world, the kind of person who can give you 1,000 pieces of gold and a promise." Song Yufo pursed her lips, hesitated for a moment, and then confessed, "In the past in Zhijiazhuang, I accidentally bumped into Mr. Su pressing Qingyi into the quilt." "What was that?" "It was so embarrassing." "Ah." Zhu Manzi sat up straight and realized that his voice was too loud. He quickly covered his mouth and leaned closer. "How is it possible? Xiaoning is so thin-skinned." "It's true. I saw it with my own eyes, but it's not true." Mr. Su admitted it at the time. "Ouch." Zhu Manzi clicked his tongue, thought for a moment, then stood up. "No, we have to tell Daning about such a big thing." "Yeah dash." Song Yufo was immediately confused and quickly pulled Zhu Manzi with anxious eyes. "Miss Zhu, don't talk nonsense. If word gets out, Qingyi will hate me to death. You promised not to talk nonsense." Zhu Manzi thought about it. People in the world must keep their promises and cannot go back on their word. But she didn't even know about such a big deal. Xiaoning was sleeping with her man, it was really unfaithful. Next time they meet, she must give Xiaoning a good lesson. Zhu Manzi thought so, sat back and asked for details in a low voice. Directly above the room is the wedding room on the second floor. In order to marry Xiao Qi, a wedding room for the bride was prepared on the building's boat. Red silk was hung on the mat and gold ornaments were placed everywhere. It had not been used before, but now that Xiao Qi is on the boat, it has naturally become Xiao Qi's bedroom and study room. It was dark outside the window, and 4 women were sitting together, surrounding a little sparrow that was shivering with cold. Xiao Qi, who was wearing a long black dress, was holding a small piece of paper and carefully looking at the small characters on it. Lu Hongluan hadn't seen Su Buling for a long time, and it goes without saying that she missed it in her heart. There was a bit of expectation on Feng Yun's cheeks, and she looked eagerly at the note in Xiao Qi's hand, as if she wanted to grab it and read it. But now her status as aunt is no longer as close as that of her fiancé, and she still calls Xiao Qi aunt, so it's hard to do anything about it. Xiao Xiang leaned lazily on the soft couch, holding pine nuts in her hand to feed the sparrows. There was a slight dissatisfaction in Ruxing's eyes. Obviously she was a little unhappy that her good brother was fooling around outside and could not come back. He had been gone for a month and a half, almost suffocating the baby to death. Even if she doesn't come back, she will still be given work to do. Let her have a daughter's home, and paint the palace guard sand for Ning Yuhi. Last night, the two of them were secretly hiding in the house to paint. Not to mention how embarrassed each other was, and they were almost caught by Hongluan. If Hongluan saw this, he would definitely think that she couldn't hold it in anymore and had sex with Ning Yu, holding a handkerchief together. What the hell? While thinking, Xiao Xiang'er found that Ning Yuhi's expression was stiff and his mood was wrong, so he asked softly. Babai, what's wrong? There is only one floor between the upper and lower floors. Ning Yuhi is good at martial arts. When he heard the whispers below, he was almost stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. King Yi has already been with Ling Er. Oh my god, how could it be so fast? How could you even hide it from me? Hearing Xiao Xiang'er's voice, Ning Yuhi came back to her senses. She blushed a little at the name Dabai, but she didn't dare to say anything wrong about her sister. She just said softly. It's nothing, I'm a little distracted. Lu Hongluan was not afraid of Xiao Xiang'er. Seeing Xiang'er being so rude, he frowned and said. Dabai, Taoist Master Ning is Ling Er's master. If you follow Ling Er, you should change your name to Master. Why are you so unruly? Xiao Xiang'er leaned softly, her eyes full of words, playing with the little sparrow and paying no attention to her. Ning Yuhi was still thinking about Qingye and Su Bu letting Ling sleep. All he could think about was master and apprentice serving the same husband and sleeping under the same quilt. Hearing Lu Hongluan's words, he felt even more embarrassed. Apart from forcing a smile, no words could be said. Lu Hongluan was still a young child present, and he was the farthest away from Su Buling, but the worry and longing in his heart were the deepest. Seeing Xiao Qi frowning as if she had seen some bad news, she quickly asked nervously. Xiao Qi, what's wrong? Is your child okay? Xiao Qi frowned slightly, took the note and looked at it carefully for a long time, and then sighed. It's okay now, but it will happen soon. There is too much movement on Bodhi Island, and the court will definitely guess the whole story soon. We can't go to Yuzhu anymore. Ah! As soon as these words came out, the three women all sat up a little straighter. Xiao Xiang'er, who was almost starving for Su Buling, was a little anxious. Why don't you go to Yuzhu and wait for Su Buling to come over? Lu Hongluan clenched her skirt tightly. What happened? Is your daughter in danger? Xiao Qi held the note and was silent for a while. Su Buling wrote a letter saying that he had the real jade seal in his hand and used a fake one to deceive the king of Wu and the king of Chu. But the court didn't know this. The fake jade seal was very likely to fall into the hands of King Wu, and it was impossible for King Wu to openly say that he had obtained the jade seal to prove Su Buling's innocence. The first time the court received the news, it was bound to seal the entire territory, detain Su Buling, and ask about the whereabouts of the jade seal. It doesn't matter if Su Buletin didn't grab it, he honestly confessed to the king of Wu and the king of Chu, and found an excuse to find out by chance when he heard the news, and the court didn't dare to mess around. But the real jade seal is in Su Buling's hands. As long as he is caught, all the secrets will be exposed. Even if he throws away or hides the jade seal, the court will not let him go until the jade seal is found. If they entered Yuzhu territory by boat, they would be detained by the imperial court without even thinking about it. If they came into contact with Su Buling, they would be suspected of harboring the jade seal, and they would definitely be targeted by the imperial court. The only way at present is to prevent the court from finding Su Buling. As long as the king of Wu can show off the fake jade seal, Su Buling will naturally wash away his grievances. If he can find a way to bring the jade seal back to Ziliang, he can good. As long as they did not come into contact with Su Buring in Yuzhu, they would not be suspected of harboring Yuxi. With the power of the three families of Xiao, Lu, and Su, the court would not take the risk of detaining their ship. Xiao Qi analyzed the situation in a flash and said softly, "We will turn around now and take the Huchuo River directly back to Ziliang. We will wait for Su Buletin in the upper reaches of the Fen River. I will write to him now to let him know." The upper reaches of the Fen River. Xiao Xianger sat up, thought about it for a moment, and then frowned and said, "Beijing Qi is beyond Taiyuan. You have already gone to Baiki. Are you planning to lead us to surrender to the enemy?" Xiao Qi looked serious. "Disguise yourself as a cargo ship and walk close to the border. In the name of Prime Minister Xiao, I will check the checkpoints along the way and cross back to Ziliang. It is only 2,000 miles away, so it should be faster." Ning Yuhi looked slightly worried. "How about I help your daughter? The target is too large for many people. Su Buling is a military leader after all. He can travel thousands of miles in a day on horseback. He can return to Suzhou in 10 days with light equipment. Let's run faster and don't let him wait too long." The three women were slightly hesitant, but it was Xiao Qi who made the decision. Their judgment of the situation was incomparable, so they could only nod their heads. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 540. Beizai. Wonton. The sky in the east was slightly bright, and the heavy snow stopped. The early rising peddlers and hawkers poured into the streets, which already had a bit of the New Year atmosphere. The room in the inn was very quiet. The red candles and the remaining wine were still on the table, and there were 2 pairs of boots on the ground. Inside the curtain, Zhongli Jiju woke up very early. There was a little blush on her baby-like tender cheeks. Her fox-like eyes were full of mixed feelings, staring at the man who was close at hand. The strange pain in her body was still there. From time to time, she frowned and uttered a faint hum, and it was unknown whether she was dissatisfied or uncomfortable. Zhongli Jiju has been a person who dares to love and hate since childhood, and she is free and easygoing. Now that this last layer of window paper has been broken, she naturally became tough again. After all, it has been given for free. What else is there to be afraid of? If a woman can't subdue a man in the boudoir, she deserves to be bullied. Facing Su Buling, who was sleeping quietly, Zhongli Jiju had no intention of being a gentle wife. She raised her hand and patted Su Buling's chest a few times. Hey, 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 you little bastard, how long are you going to sleep? You're still. Su Buling woke up with a start. Seeing that it was already bright, he took a deep breath and felt that he was not very tired. It was natural for them to do it together. When they were deeply in love, it was natural. Last night, Zhongli Jiju was very cooperative. After letting go, her original temperament was revealed. She looked like reading a lot of books. "Sister will teach you," and she responded actively. Although it was very awkward, it was also a special enjoyment, and the taste of it was not something that outsiders could tell. Su Buling turned his head and smiled dotingly. "Madam, you woke up so early." Zhongli Jiju has always been a person who dares to climb up the roof and tear down the tiles if given a ladder. Now that her status is different, she is no longer afraid of Su Buling. She sat up, hugged her chest with her left hand, and pushed Su Buling with her right hand. "Are you comfortable? Are you satisfied? Get up, and you want me to help you put on your clothes?" Su Buling chuckled and sat up. "Madam, don't make trouble." "I have to make trouble. It was you who insisted on marrying me. When I go back, I will turn your backyard upside down." Ning Yuhi, right? Who is afraid of who? The fierce words were just to cover up the shame in his heart. Su Buling put on his clothes, leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. "Okay, let's go down to eat." Zhongli Jiju kicked Su Buling with her legs. then shrank back and wrapped herself tightly. You go down first, don't forget to give the wine gourd to King Yi, you almost scared me to death last night, and you are still heartless behind me, bah, I found you are a shameless person. Su Buling frowned slightly, looking down, try to be mean to your husband again. Hey dash. Zhongli Jiju's beautiful face showed some dissatisfaction, sitting up straight, what's wrong with me being mean? You come and deal with me, it won't tire you out? I've been eaten up, what am I afraid of? Su Buling really had nothing to say. In the lobby of the inn, the shopkeeper stood behind the counter and calculated. Ning Qingyi, wearing a snow-white dress, sat quietly at the wine table by the window, with her sword at hand, and next to her was the breakfast she had just bought outside, for 4 people, but she didn't touch her chopsticks. After waiting for a while, footsteps were heard on the stairs. Ning Qingyi turned around and saw Su Buling coming down from upstairs with Nightingale. He was wearing a white robe and had a cold and extraordinary face, like a banished immortal who did not care about worldly things. He held a wine gourd in his hand. Ning Qingyi glanced at the wine gourd, then quickly looked away and looked out the window without saying a word. Miss Ning got up so early and prepared breakfast. You are thoughtful. Su Buling walked to the table, brushed the hem of his robe, sat down, and placed the wine gourd in front of Ning Qingyi. Ning Qingyi's thoughts were always written on her face. She was obviously a little stiff at this time. She tilted her head to look at the wine gourd. What are you doing? It's early in the morning, I don't drink. Su Buling was silent for a while. He didn't plan to give Qingyi a wine gourd. Giving it at this time was obviously a perfunctory job and not sincere. Thinking of this, Su Buling raised his hand to take off the sword at his waist and handed it to Ning Qingyi. I just want to drink a few sips, by the way, I'm not good at swordplay, it's a bit of a waste to hold this sword. You are my senior sister. I have been here for so long, but I have never given you anything. I heard from Manzi that you like the Zanlu very much, but that sword has been given to Manzi. This sword is given to you. Ning Qingyi was stunned. The Zayadan sword is a national treasure, one of the most precious treasures that a swordsman wants. Naturally, she was jealous. But it's okay to give her an ordinary wine gourd, but how can I give her the Zayadan sword? It's too precious. A swordsman always carries his sword with him, how can I give it to others? You take it back, I don't want it. Ning Qingyi shook his head and pushed the snow-white sword away. Su Buling put the sword on the table, if Miss Ning feels embarrassed, just give me your sword as well, and we will be even. Hearing this, Ning Qingyi quickly picked up the famous sword Shang Chun and put it in his arms. No, this is my mother's sword, I can't give it to a man. This Zayadan was also given to me by my mother, isn't it the same? If you don't want it, I will give it to Master and replace her by Caillou. I think Master will be very happy. Ning Qingyi hesitated a little when she heard this. The spring and autumn are sister swords in the martial arts world. They were originally the weapons of a pair of martial arts lovers in the previous dynasty. Her master had finally collected them for the purpose of pairing them. If Su Buling took the autumn, wouldn't it be the couple's sword she took? Ning Qingyi hesitated for a moment and said lightly, forget it, whatever you want. Then he put the sword on the table and picked up Su Buling's sword, let's take turns to use it. When you can't bear to part with it, you can change it back, don't break my sword. He. Su Buling nodded with a smile, put away the Qingfeng long sword, didn't say more about this matter, picked up the chopsticks. Eat, eat. After a while, Zhongli Jiju also came down from upstairs. Her expression had almost returned to her usual appearance. She rubbed her waist and looked a little lazy. She sat opposite Su Buling, far away, and didn't dare to make eye contact. Ning Qingyi's mind was on the sword, so naturally he didn't notice anything unusual. Before the 4 of them finished their breakfast, The inn's lobby was filled with the sound of chirping, and a little sparrow, almost exhausted, flew in from the door and landed directly on the table between the four people. It lay on the table already drooping, not even bothering to move its wings. Zhongli Jiju and the little sparrow had been dependent on each other for many years, and seeing the pain, he quickly picked up the little sparrow and held it in his arms to warm it. He took the small note from the sparrow and handed it to Su Buling, and then took out pine nuts to feed it. Su Buling put down his chopsticks, unfolded the note and looked at it for a few seconds, then frowned slightly. Ning Qingyi saw Su Buling's serious face and asked, "What did the master and the others say?" Su Buling put down the note, frowning, "I ran too hastily in the underground palace and didn't have time to deal with the eunuch's skeleton. I'm afraid Chang'an City will soon guess the whole story. I will definitely be targeted." Ning Qingyi was a little puzzled. He looked around and whispered, "The jade seal has been swapped, and no one else knows. Now the jade seal should be taken by Li Hanzheng. The only people who know you are in leading county are those who want to rob things, and they won't leak the news. The court should chase Li Hanzheng. Why would they target you?" Su Buling shook his head. "For this kind of thing, it's better to kill the wrong person than to let him go. Even if I didn't go to Liaxi, as long as I appear in Yuzhu, I can't get rid of the relationship. The court will not let me go unless the jade seal is found. What should I do? Xiao Qi and the others' ship has turned back. We have to leave before the court blocks the road. In Taiyuan, take the boat and join them, otherwise it will be difficult to get out." Ning Qingyi nodded, without hesitation, picked up the sword, then set off now. Su Buling shook his head, looked at the note in his hand, and hesitated. The letter also said that Chuchu was not on the boat. The day after we left Huainan, Chuchu also came with us. Ah! Zhongli Jiju, who had just become a young woman, was eating. When she heard this, her face turned pale and she looked a little nervous. "How could it be? Didn't I tell her to sit on the boat? Why did she come here?" Yingying put down her chopsticks and thought, "We have finished fighting the Tang family and Bodhi Island and are ready to return. She hasn't shown up yet. Will she be in trouble?" Ning Qingyi blinked and shook his head. "She rides a broken camel. If she goes by land, it's hard to say whether she has reached Fanyang County City now." The four of them fell silent at the same time, speechless. Su Buling rubbed his forehead and looked at his wife. "Why did you buy a camel for Chuchu? How can you ride a camel to travel the rivers and lakes?" Zhongli Jiju looked innocent. She was nervous and worried, so she didn't dare to retort. She said softly, "She was born in the western regions, so she must have a certain appearance. Riding a horse is just like an ordinary woman in the rivers and lakes." The three of them were speechless. When the court reacts, it will inevitably launch an unimaginable high-intensity hunt, which will only happen in the next 2 days. Zhongli Chuchu and Su Buling had contact in Huainan. The rescue of Chuchu in Hongshan Lake was known to everyone in the rivers and lakes. If Chuchu was left alone, it was obvious that she would be caught by the court and used to force Su Buling to show up. Su Buling patted his forehead and stood up. "Hurry up and go to Fanyang County to inquire about the news, find Chuchu back, and then we will go together." The three women didn't dare to delay, and immediately got up and left the room, driving their horses to gallop towards Fanyang County.